the deadliest blade in the Perseus span, caught in the bare hands of a diplomat. Nixia Vane dropped from the ventilation shaft of the isolated sector, a ghost descending into the dim light. Her monofilament wrist blade hissed toward Ambassador Julian Vance's neck. A guaranteed kill. No organic nervous system could track a strike moving in milliseconds. But the human didn't just see it. He raised his bare hands. The ultra-sharp edge bit into soft flesh. Blood spilled over the metal, and the weapon stopped dead. It turned out a galaxy built on absolute force had never encountered a species built on absolute refusal. Hours earlier, the Eithilgard Nexus had hummed with its usual predatory grace. Dozens of alien delegates sat around the vast central table, breathing recycled air tailored to a dozen different physiologies. High Praetor Corvin of the Xylar hegemony presided over them all, his immense scaled form casting a long shadow across the room. He projected the new resource treaty onto the central hololith. It was extortion draped in the polite language of diplomacy. He expected immediate submission. Every subordinate faction lowered their eyes, ready to sign away their worlds to keep the peace. Then came the Solarian. Ambassador Julian Vance didn't have armor plating or acid-laced spit. He was soft, fragile, yet he picked up the datapad, looked Corvin directly in his compound eyes, and physically handed the unsigned treaty back across the polished metal table. A flat, quiet refusal. The room went dead silent. Corvin didn't argue. He didn't have to. The hegemony didn't tolerate defiance. Beneath the table, Corvin's heavy claws tapped out a silent, encrypted pulse, an execution order sent straight to the Obsidian Directorate, which brought Nixia Vane to this dark, vibrating corridor in the Nexus's underbelly. She was the apex predator of her caste, engineered for silent slaughter. They expected a quick assassination, a warning to any other upstart worlds trying to claim a seat at the table. But as Julian Vance's hands locked around her blade, the script tore apart. His blood was warm and bright red, dripping onto the deck plates in a steady rhythm. The lacerations were deep, cutting down to the bone. Yet his grip didn't falter. It was a vice grip forged by 1,000,000 years of gravity and pure persistence. Nixia stared into his eyes. There was no panic, just a terrifying, quiet focus. She needed to break his hold. Nixia triggered the secondary mechanisms in her gauntlet. 3 hollow spines shot forward from her wrist, sinking deep into the diplomat's forearm. A maximum dose of Drexel neurotoxin pumped directly into his bloodstream. The chemical was cold, designed to paralyze a massive shock trooper in 3 heartbeats. She waited for his eyes to roll back, for his muscles to go slack. Instead, his jaw tightened. The veins in his neck pushed against his thin skin as a primal chemical flooded his system. Adrenaline, a biological override so violent it burned right through the venom's paralyzing grip. He wasn't shutting down. He was waking up. They had expected an easy kill, but they ignited an evolutionary awakening. Nixia realized too late that she had just backed a survivor of a fiercely hostile planet into a corner. And the profound difference between engineered weaponry and evolutionary survival was currently bleeding all over her blade and refusing to let go. Nixia's processor screamed at her to recalculate. The human's hands, slick with his own blood, shifted. He didn't pull away from the pain. He leaned into it. With a brutal, mechanical twist of his wrists, Vance wrenched the monofilament blade laterally. The composite metal shrieked. The weapon snapped free from Nixia's gauntlet housing. Before her nervous system could trigger a defensive retreat, he stepped directly into her guard. He drove his shoulder hard into her chest plate. The impact was heavy, dense with a terrifying internal gravity she hadn't anticipated. He slammed her backward, pinning her rigidly against the cold corridor wall. He pressed the captured edge flush against her throat. Nixia stopped breathing. She knew exactly how little pressure was required to sever her primary arteries. She stared up at his face. His skin was fiercely flushed, his muscles trembling violently under the strain of the neurotoxin warring against his own adrenaline. Sweat pooled at his temples. He was burning through his own cellular reserves just to keep her penned. She waited for the execution. In the hegemony, the defeated opponent was a dead one. But Vance's eyes shifted. The violent tremor in his jaw relaxed. He exhaled a long, ragged breath, lowered the lethal edge, and let it clatter onto the deck plates. He turned his back on the deadliest operative in the Perseus span and limped away down the hall, clutching his bleeding arm. Nixia sagged against the bulkhead. Her entire understanding of the universe fractured in that exact second. It turned out mercy isn't a weakness. It's the ultimate display of apex power. Hours later, High Praetor Corvin sat in the harsh light of the Hegemony Command Center, listening to Nixia Vane's flat, factual debriefing. She detailed the bare-handed interception, the biological override of the Drexel toxin, the physical disarm, the absolute unshakable restraint. The Intelligence Division analysts watched the telemetry logs in pure disbelief. They categorized Solarians as soft, compliant targets. The analysts immediately input a new directive into the central database, officially reclassifying the Solarian species as a Class 0 threat. Non-engageable. You cannot intimidate a creature that routinely survives its own hostile biology through sheer stubbornness. When the central negotiating table reconvened the next morning, the air was sharp with anticipation. Ambassador Vance took his seat. His hands were wrapped entirely in thick white medical synth weave. High Praetor Corvin loomed over the central hololith. He looked at those bandaged hands, then up at Vance's calm, unblinking expression. Corvin reached out and permanently deleted the original resource treaty. In its place, he projected a newly drafted agreement: equal extraction rights, shared orbital governance, a perfectly equitable pact. It proved that compassion and restraint were the greatest disruptors of tyrannical systems. Vance stood. He didn't gloat. He simply extended his right hand across the table, a physical gesture of mutual agreement. Corvin hesitated for a fraction of a second, then enclosed the fragile, heavily bandaged hand within his massive claws. That evening, Nixia Vane stood on the main observation deck, watching the distant drift of star clusters. Her wrist was bare. Her caste insignia was completely gone. She had officially resigned her commission. She heard the deliberate, uneven footsteps approach from behind. Vance leaned against the viewing railing beside her, nursing a steaming cup of dark, aromatic liquid in his unwounded hand. She looked at him, completely baffled by his existence. He looked back, offering a small, exhausted smile. He tipped his head toward the corridor, silently offering to share whatever bitter, brewed Solarian stimulant was in his cup. Nixia didn't know what it tasted like, but for the first time in her life, she willingly fell into step beside her target.